Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the last of the 8 presentations of the SILGA Speaker Series. My name is Amy Grice, and I'm a councillor with the town of Oliver, as well as a director on the SILGA board. I would like to acknowledge that we are producing this presentation while on the traditional unceded lands of the Tecumleps Secwepemc people. I'd like to thank all of the sponsors that supported this speaker series: BC Assessment, Etsy BC, Fortis BC, ICBC, Municipal Finance Authority, Shaw Communications, TELUS, and Trans Mountain Expansion. We will now show an infomercial from Fortis BC, our sponsor for this series, who will introduce the speaker for this session, Dr. Brett Fairbairn, President of Thompson Rivers University.
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. I'd like to start off by mentioning that Shelley Martins and I would like to say hello to all the SILGA members and to stay tuned for our new design of our socks. I know we all like our socks, and we'll hopefully get those out to you by UBCM. So that's great. So thanks for the opportunity to speak to you all this afternoon. I'd like to first acknowledge that I'm delivering the presentation on the traditional territory of the Syilx people, where I sit here in Kelowna. My name is Matt Mason, and I am a Community and Indigenous Relations Manager for Fortis BC. I'd like to speak today about what we're doing to help your community on climate action. Some of you may not be aware of this, but Fortis BC is the province's largest deliverer of energy, with our utility responsible for delivering 21% of the province's energy needs. Fortis BC delivers natural and renewable gas, but we also deliver electricity to many communities in the Okanagan, Kootenays. We own and operate 4 hydroelectric dams and own and operate approximately 7,260 kilometers of power lines, in addition to approximately 49,000 kilometers of gas lines. Because we're also provide electricity to many communities in the province, we understand the risks and challenges of relying on one system to meet the province's climate goals. Therefore, it's important for us to play a constructive role in the development of Clean BC. As you are aware, Fortis Clean BC target is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% from 2007 levels by 2030. As part of the consultations for the development of Clean BC, we submitted our plan, the Clean Growth Pathway to 2050, which outlined the role that Fortis BC could play in achieving the province's target. To get to 2030, we have set our own target for the next 10 years. 30 by 30 is our target to reduce the customer's GHG emissions by 30% by the year 2030. Our target is one of the most ambitious emissions reduction targets in the Canadian utility sector today. How are we going to get there? Our plan is comprised of 4 pillars. Energy efficiency. We're investing $90 million annually by 2022. These investments include rebates and programs to supports to make new and existing buildings more energy efficient. Renewable natural gas. This includes sources derived from organic waste, but also from other sources such as wood waste. By 2030, 15% of the gas that we deliver in our system will come from renewable, carbon neutral sources. More supply is coming. 12 renewable gas projects have been approved by our regulator just in 2020. LNG. There is a good opportunity for us to reduce GHG emissions in certain sectors that are difficult to electrify, such as marine shipping. We are seeking to expand our Tilbury LNG facility in Delta to meet these needs, and wish to position the Port of Vancouver as an LNG marine fueling hub. Some local customers include Seaspan and BC Ferries. Zero and low carbon transportation. We are supporting the expansion of electric vehicles in the passenger market, with charging vehicles and expansion of alternative fuel vehicles in the medium and heavy duty sector, such as waste haulers and transit buses. Working with you and your community in achieving our 30 by 30 target will set us up for long-term success in achieving the province's 2050 80% GHG emissions reduction target. Our vision for the year 2050 involves using both electricity and gas systems to achieve the province's target. Our vision is supported by a study that we commissioned with Guidehouse Consulting, which examined 2 pathways for achieving the province's 2050 GHG emissions reduction target. One of those pathways focused on significant electrification. The second focused on utilizing both energy systems that exist in the province today, which the study called diversified pathway. A copy of this study can be found on our website at fortisbc.com/30by30. The study found that both pathways can achieve GHG emissions reductions required by 2050, but the diversified pathway will continue to utilize a gas system, which will maintain the reliability and resilience that we enjoy with our energy systems today. There are 2 points worth highlighting here. The first is that under the diversified pathway, by 2050, 73% of the gas that is delivered to your community through the gas system will need to come from renewable and carbon neutral sources such as organic, wood waste, and hydrogen injection. The second is the gas system provides a firm and flexible energy delivery capability to address peak demand in the winter. On January 14, 2020, the coldest day in the province, the gas system delivered the equivalent of 18,000 megawatts of energy, which almost doubled the BC Hydro's peak load of 10,000 megawatts. Under electrification pathway, in order to replace the gas system's role in heating and building in peak demand situations, the province would require approximately 8,800 megawatts of new electricity generation. Our main takeaway is that there are different ways to achieve the target that we need to achieve that fully utilizes the infrastructure we have both underground and above today. And the decisions you make today and tomorrow with respect to community planning and future energy needs should be considered in a broader context with respect to affordability, community impact, and community resilience. We hope that our 5-minute presentation is just a preview of important conversations that we wish to have with you and your community going forward. Our line is always open, and we would be happy to have a follow-up presentation or workshop about any of the material that I reported on here today. Now to talk a little bit about Fairbairn. The roles of universities in regional recovery. Universities and regions are each other's greatest strengths. This perspective is exemplified by Thompson River University, TRU. In 2020, TRU adopted a new vision in recommitting the university to Indigenous and rural learners and the needs of nearby communities, large and small. The impact of the pandemic has accentuated this thinking as universities like TRU look to lead BC's and region's recovery. Universities will play a key role in addressing the economic and social inequities amplified by the impact of the pandemic. The faculty-student relationship is central to what universities offer. Not just delivery of course materials, but the power of mobilizing trained minds to work with communities on solving emerging problems. Through partnership, universities will continue to positive community change. This includes partnerships with the universities as TRU works together with others in the Interior Universities Research Consortium, as well as partnerships with ministries, nonprofits, health authorities, municipalities, industry, business, and nations. President Fairbairn will give examples of emerging partnerships and some of the problems we will work on together. Here are some quick examples to demonstrate FortisBC's partnership with TRU. FortisBC has committed to funding an invasive plant research study to help with our reclamation of our pipeline projects in the Kamloops area and region. We have sponsored the TRU's new trades trailer in for community training. We've also committed to 3 scholarships awarded just last month to women and Indigenous women in trades. One that supports 3rd and 4th year female apprentice in trades with preference to electrical, welding, and millwright students. The next 2 are bursaries for Indigenous women in trades with preference to electrical, welding, millwright, and a focus on foundation programs. Now to introduce Dr. Fairbairn. Dr. Fairbairn is a distinguished academic and passionate advocate for universities and higher education. His interests include students and access, particularly governance and community university engagement. As a leader, he strives to strategic leadership, relationship development, and strong value system of integrity, respect, and accountability. He became TRU's president and vice chancellor on December 1st, 2018. His prior career as a scholar and teacher includes contributions in German, international history, governance, and community-based organizations and enterprises, ethics and leadership, and public policy. Welcome, Dr. Fairbairn.
Hello to each and all. My name is Brett Fairbairn and I'm president at Thompson Rivers University. I'd like to speak to you today about my conviction that universities and regions are each other's greatest strengths. What do you think of when you think of region? For me, region begins with land and history. I take my inspiration from these hills and valleys, rivers and lakes, which have been stewarded since time immemorial by the peoples of this place. Here in Kamloops, I'm on the unceded ancestral lands of Tk'emlúps Tshikwappemk. We honor Tk'emlúps Tshikwappemk as our first house at TRU. TRU also has a campus in Williams Lake on the unceded lands of the Taochalch. Both of these places are in Secwepemcúlecw, the land of the Secwepemc people. This land, that's where we're rooted. And from our lands, we also serve the peoples of nearby territories, including the Statliam, the Inklakatmuk, the Tsilkotin, the Nuhak, and the Dakelth. For thousands of years, people here have made a living, enjoyed these lands, traded, and traveled. Our lives here today are part of a long continuity that did not begin with settlement and colonization. Today, regions like this one are more tightly connected than ever into the global trade and exchange systems. And globalization means change. COVID-19 is one example of globalization. It's a big one. The pandemic will cause change and accelerate changes that were already underway. I think it's to your credit that the Southern Interior Local Government Association is mounting a speaker series on the pandemic and the recovery. I know that your organization includes some 37 cities, towns, villages, and districts, and so far in my short time as a resident of BC, I've spent time in about 15 of them, long enough to get out and have a look around. I look forward to visiting each and every one when I can. Before I came here, I spent most of my time in Saskatchewan. I remember my grandparents' farm 1 mile outside of Resource, Saskatchewan. The farm I remember visiting as a child had a horse, a couple of cattle, guinea fowl, and wheat. It was a 1 mile walk on a gravel road to the store and the community hall in town. A town, by the way, that no longer appears on maps. My father was a journalist for the Western Producer, and I remember traveling with him as a kid to agricultural fairs, flooded fields, and train derailments. Small prairie towns have had it hard in the last 4 generations. Commodity price fluctuations, withdrawal of services, exodus of young people. Canada has undergone dramatic urbanization, and the flip side of urbanization is the hollowing out of rural regions. I don't know how the experience in the rural prairies compares to your experiences in this part of the country, but generally no rural places, except those adjacent to metropolitan centers, have done great. I was active for a time with the Canadian Rural Restructuring Foundation. You may know of their work. And I learned 2 things about visiting, or from my visiting and learning about non-metropolitan communities across Canada. The biggest thing I learned is that rural places need to change in order to thrive. That means that even if you succeed, what you had will disappear, or at least it won't be the same, and that's a very hard thing. You can't keep what you had. The good news is, perhaps we can make something different and better. The second lesson I learned is that it's no longer about places, not from an economic or services perspective. It's about region. To access health care, food, equipment, banking, government appointments, and services means rural people today crisscross regions that are an hour or 2 or more across. Our main university campus here is in Kamloops, but Kamloops isn't cut off from the region around it. There's no wall around Kamloops, and I haven't heard that Mayor Christian is planning to build one. Kamloops, like Williams Lake, is part of a region. It's part of Secwepemcúlecw. Some may think of Kamloops as a relatively large place, but I can tell you that to the rest of the world, all of this, all of southern BC, Kelowna and Kamloops included, all of this is rural. I was reminded of that fact when I was hosting a lunch to meet students back before the pandemic. And most of the students who signed up to meet the president of the university were international students in that case. And as I went around the table and asked where the students were from, they said Mexico City, Manila, Singapore, Shanghai, Delhi. Those are cities that are not just bigger than any city in Canada, but cities whose population is a big fraction of all of Canada's put together. So I also asked them, why did they come to TRU? And one after another, they mentioned, because the community is so small. It's safe here. I can focus on my studies. The people are friendly. The nature is beautiful. One student came because they saw in a photo that we have deer living on our campus. Being small-scale and friendly and safe and natural, that's our superpower in this region. And that's one of the reasons I say that region is TRU's greatest strength. Now, I said earlier that region is the product of land and history, and I think you probably all know the general story of TRU's history. We were founded as Caribou College in 1970, became a university in 2005, and we kept many of the strongest college programs, as well as adding on university programs to them, everything in university degrees up to law and master's degrees. We also have a huge online operation in open learning, and about 40% of our on-campus student population consists of international students from India, China, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Nigeria, indeed from over 100 countries around the world. And those international students are one of our big contributions back to the development of this region. TRU has grown to fit the region that we're in, and we're going to continue to do so. The way we reflect our region is expressed in the programs that we offer. Things like adventure tourism, natural resource science, sustainable ranching, Secwepemc students learning Secwepemc language and knowledge under the direction of knowledgeable instructors and elders. Our researchers and students are people who work on the problems of the region. I think about Professor Locke Fraser, our federally funded NSERC Industrial Research Chair, who works with other researchers testing soil and water and helping to reclaim contaminated land. We're about to announce, anytime soon, a new federally funded NSERC research chair in fire research. That's one of 2 chairs that will build up a cluster of expertise in natural disaster prediction, response, and management. I think of Professor Courtney Mason, our Canada Research Chair in Rural Livelihoods and Sustainable Communities. Courtney works with the Canadian Mountain Network and has a project on Indigenous land rights and sustainable protected areas in mountain environments. And he's a member of our Faculty of Adventure, Culinary Arts and Tourism. We have Professor Rod McCormick, our BC Regional Innovation Chair in Indigenous Health and Education, and Professor Shelley Johnson, our Canada Research Chair in Indigenizing Higher Education. And I could also mention Professor John Church, our Chair in Cattle Industry Sustainability, and others, but I think you get the idea. Our researchers' work and their students' work belongs here, in this place, in this region, because it's about here. And by the way, it's a competitive advantage for us to have teaching and research programs that focus on issues of relevance. I've been involved in a lot of faculty hirings over the years, and I can tell you that there's fierce competition for universities to hire faculty and academic leaders. Usually, we get the best people when they see a connection to this region. Maybe they're from here and want to come back, or maybe it's because their academic interests make it especially sensible for them to be located here. Sometimes it's because there's a critical mass of researchers collected in one space, working on common problems. But all of that, those are just different ways of saying that for our key academic hirings, it's often about the place and the region. Or like the real estate agents say, it's location, location, location. Recently, TRU went through a nearly year-long process with thousands of participants to develop a new vision statement for our university. We adopted that vision statement a year ago, just as the pandemic hit. And like a lot of things, it's become even more important and more relevant because of the impact of COVID-19. The very first words in our vision statement are that TRU is a university that is community-minded with a global conscience. In our vision, we set out to be a place of belonging where people are empowered to transform themselves, and that's based on our values of inclusion and diversity, community-mindedness, curiosity, and sustainability. We also, in the vision statement, adopted 4 strategic change goals of areas where we aim to grow and to change over the coming years. That includes eliminating achievement gaps, such as for Indigenous and rural learners, honoring truth, reconciliation, and rights, leading in community research and scholarship, and designing lifelong learning. All of those are goals that directly relate to the needs of this region where we're located. Since the pandemic arrived, we've also been doing some thinking about TRU's role in the recovery that is to come. We received a boost from a very recent Conference Board of Canada study that was just released. It's titled Directing the COVID Recovery, Assessing the Impacts of Potential Stimulus Policies in British Columbia. And it compared post-secondary education with conventional stimulus measures like infrastructure spending or tax cuts. The Conference Board concluded that investing in post-secondary education institutions would result in the greatest short-term economic impact, whether measured in jobs, gross domestic product, or government revenues. It would also generate the greatest employment and income benefits for women, immigrants, Indigenous people, and racialized minorities. So if the public wants a quick recovery or an equitable one, we should invest in post-secondary education. And those research and those findings are available online. I'd be happy to share a link. Now that's true for investment in all post-secondary institutions. It's the best, quickest, most equitable path to recovery. But concerning TRU in particular, we already know that our economic impact in our region is considerable. In 2019, we had a professional study done by an expert consulting firm called MC, and they estimated that TRU's annual economic impact is $705 million in the region, $1.5 billion in the province, and that's each and every year. 1 of every 9 jobs in the Thompson, Nicola, and Caribou regions is supported by the activities of TRU and its students, past and present. Now, I've been talking about dollars. It was an economic impact study, after all. But here's an interesting thing. Our university's economic impact is not really about where we spend money. Its impact is not primarily in our being an employer, a real estate developer, a building manager, a construction company, a purchaser of goods, or a purchaser of services. We do all those things incidental to our mission. It's not about money. Our impact is about minds. The largest impacts are from alumni, students who've graduated from the university and are using the knowledge and skills gained through university education to better themselves, their employers and workplaces, and the communities around them. So to see our economic impact, look where our graduates are. Wherever a TRU graduate is located, that's where our impact is. And what they're doing, that's our impact in your communities. Statistics show that graduates have more accomplishments, greater skills, higher family earnings, better health and well-being because of their university training and education. So that's why I say that while universities have an enormous economic impact, it's not primarily about money, it's about minds. So, knowing all that, last summer we did some thinking about what more we could do and what specifically TRU could do to further the recovery. We collected our thoughts in a recent document that's available on our website titled TRU's Role in BC's Recovery, and we looked at what we can do using our own existing resources and what additional things we can do with new partnerships. Now, it's not a small thing, but one of our contributions is that we've kept operating throughout the pandemic. Like other universities, we did not shut our doors. We moved everything online that we could in the course of about a week last year, a vast and unplanned experiment in remote working and remote learning. We're drawing lessons from that, things that we will likely change forever as a result of our learning and experimentation during the pandemic. But in the meantime, students have kept learning and kept graduating. It's about the minds. We're continuing to train people from our region and abroad who will be here to support the recovery. And we're committed to moving forward and achieving parity in participation and success for Indigenous students in particular. We're moving to eliminate gaps in retention rates and student success. We're moving to create new financial awards to support recruitment and retention of Indigenous students. We're signing new partnerships. We're delivering more programs in community, expanding our popular offerings in trades delivered on location for First Nations. So that's a very important commitment that we're moving forward with to support the recovery. We're also launching new programs in data science and in social justice. We're supporting the world of virtual learning through Canada's only graduate certificate in online teaching and learning. Those are important activities that keep supporting development and keep producing minds and skilled people for the recovery, for the economy, and for society. And in addition to those commitments, things that we're doing on our own resources, with the help of governments and other partners, we also hope to launch new bachelor's programs in electrical and computer engineering. We hope to launch a Bachelor of Education in Trades and Technology to prepare the teachers who will elevate career paths for students in trades and technology. We hope to start a Master of Nurse Practitioner, and a Master of Social Work. In addition to all of those programs, we're very pleased to have been able to work with the Government of BC to adapt our existing programs that are relevant to the pandemic and the recovery, such as by expanding seats in respiratory therapy. It's also important that what our students learn is relevant to the workplace. And the topic of work-integrated learning, co-ops and apprenticeships is one that has become only more important as we go through the pandemic and think about the recovery. We're grateful to the many employers who've found ways to continue with virtual co-op placements under the circumstances that we currently have, and we look forward to expanding our network of places where our students can learn to work and learn in workplaces as part of their programs. And it's not just about programs. Technology is also part of the recovery and of the future to come. So certainly we're looking for governments and other partners to invest in improved physical and digital infrastructure, not just on our campuses. We need, and communities need, improved broadband services in rural and remote areas to increase access to education. And we welcome important commitments that we've heard made by the province. We're looking to develop new clean energy systems. Like everybody else, we want to become carbon zero. And we think at TRU we can do that before the end of this decade through investments in our own technology. As a research university, research is also part of our role in supporting the recovery. Many of our faculty have started new research projects that are related to the impact of the pandemic and how to come out of it in the communities we serve. We're looking to expand community-based research and to fund student researchers at both the undergraduate and graduate levels. And I know you've already heard from Dr. Will Garrett-Petts, and I'm willing to bet that Will mentioned undergraduate and graduate student research. To support all of this, we're advocating for the creation of an Interior Region Research Development Fund, and we're supporting the establishment of a BC Tourism Research Centre at TRU. So we have a lot that we're planning to do, and a lot more ideas besides. Once again, we've put our ideas out there on the web, and I'd be happy to send the link as a follow-up. I hope my comments have laid out why and how we think about region and communities. It's part of who we are, it's part of our history, it's part of how we do things at TRU. And our new vision statement commits us more explicitly than ever to that community-minded approach. As I've said, it's not about money, it's about minds, and it's also about partnerships. Partnerships include partnerships with central government. An example of that is the new BC Research Chair in Predictive Services, Emergency Management and Fire Science. That chair is the result of a 2-year effort among the province of BC, the mayors of Kamloops, Kelowna and Prince George, and the Interior University Research Coalition, which is a group of universities that includes TRU, UBC Okanagan, and the University of Northern British Columbia. Partnerships with other universities have grown particularly important. The Interior University Research Coalition is a cornerstone of our partnership work. It's included not only that research cluster in disaster prevention, response, recovery and resilience, but another research cluster related to regional, rural and remote communities, and obtaining $170,000 in provincial funding to address health research questions specific to the BC Interior. So partnerships with other universities are a big part of how we work. Partnerships with local government are too, and I'm sure Will have already described to you our new researcher in residence partnership with the City of Kamloops and with MyTax. We partner with First Nations to close achievement gaps and deliver programs on site, and of course we partner with employers and other organizations. And I would say that during the pandemic, all of us have learned to work together closer than ever before. That's true between universities and government, and it's true among universities. Recent announcements by many institutions about plans to return to largely in-person instruction in the fall illustrate a collaborative relationship that's unlike anything I've ever seen before. Working together is one of the lasting lessons that I believe we will take from this pandemic. Certainly there are priorities that we ought to consider altogether. I have no doubt that we need to work together to ensure that the priorities and needs of rural regions are not forgotten or overlooked. We need those investments in community broadband infrastructure. We need clean tech, clean energy, and clean resources as a basis for BC's recovery, and that has special implications for rural areas where energy and resources are located. We need to think about tourism, hospitality, and cultural industries, and how they can receive a short-term and immediate boost. We need to improve the labor market by eliminating attainment gaps for underrepresented groups and by bringing in new Canadians. That means ensuring people have skills and work experience. And we need equity, bearing in mind that there's growing awareness of how many women, racialized minorities, and those in precarious occupations have suffered disproportionately during the pandemic as well as before. So I'm not here to tell you that universities have all the answers to these challenges, but at TRU we've identified things we can work on to contribute to those priorities, and we're looking forward to doing more in partnership with all kinds of communities across our region. Thank you very much for listening to my comments. I hope I've conveyed a bit of why I think regions and universities are so important to each other. I look forward to talking with you, to hearing your questions and comments, and one day to visiting each and every one of your communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, President Fairbairn. So we're now ready for the question and answer portion of the session. So please use your chat feature in your Zoom feed to ask President Fairbairn a question. We do have some that were submitted ahead of time, so you may have touched on these a little bit already, but perhaps there's some room to expand. So the first question I have is, as some TRU satellite offices have had to close in rural communities, how do you see new relationships between TRU and small communities being reignited?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good. I have to say, I can't see a list of participants or screens, so I'm just trusting the technology that there's actually someone out there. But thank you very much for the question. And it's true that as part of our efforts to control our own expenditures in the last year, one of the things that we did was to institute an incentive program for early retirements. And the staff we had working at a number of our regional centers took advantage of the early retirement incentives, and that led us really to evaluate our role in those communities. So it wasn't a long-term planned initiative, it was really more a response to those retirements. But what we saw when we had a look at the numbers is really that more and more of our activity is not occurring in leased facilities. It's occurring in one-time use of facilities or in community delivery on First Nations, things like that. So looks like that's pretty much the way of the future. And some of our regional centers have already been working that way. Our regional center in the Lillooet-Lytton area, and in the Ashcroft-Cache Creek area as well, that we've been using periodic facilities when we offer programs. So I think the transition is really from a fixed leased facility to more flexible kinds of programming. And we've already seen an uptick and we expect to see more in the future. So thanks very much for that question.
So the next question asks, TRU has been very forward-thinking in terms of anticipating future needs for study. Do you have any thoughts on what kind of programs are going to be needed for next generation learners?
Yeah, that's an enormous question, by the way. So that's something that that my colleagues and I think about all the time, and we're certainly looking for ideas. I think what we've certainly heard from research, from trends, the needs of labor markets, is that the future holds a growth in various kinds of healthcare education, and not necessarily training for the specific professions that we know, but training for all kinds of healthcare related occupations and research roles as well. So that's an interesting development, and it's one that leads us to think about healthcare studies as a field rather than distinct things only like nursing or like respiratory therapy. Professional master's programs are certainly something that is a trend as people look to further develop their skills after they've been in the workforce for some time, or to branch out and shift into new fields. And we've had a lot of discussion about micro-credentials, and we appreciate the government of BC is funding some pilots and really spurring development in that area. So thinking micro-credentials in my mind are really a way of thinking about useful skills that people can get from education and training, and ways to recognize those specific skills in a more fine-grained way than a whole certificate or degree would be. So those are some of the things that we see on the horizon.
Great, thank you. The next question, with the advent of Zoom, do you see more TRU programs being available to rural students and thus easing the financial necessity of having to move to a university setting?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. And when I mentioned learnings from the pandemic, one of the things that all of us are really interested to see is how people's tolerance and interest in different modes of learning evolves based on their experience. And I would say so far what we've seen is a mixture. So a few weeks ago, we did a survey of our existing students and asked them about their preferences. And at that time, and it's influenced by what's in the news on the day, of course, but at that time we had 1/4 of our students who were really keen to be back learning in person. We had another quarter that were really keen to stay online and not come back in person. And half of them were in the middle, sort of it depends and waiting to see. But that, I think, illustrates one of the challenges for us. There are students for whom online learning works really, really well, and we should keep meeting the needs of that group of students. And there's others for whom it doesn't work at all. And I think especially of first-year students, first-in-family learners, first-generation students. So people who are looking to be socialized to education and not just to kind of get the information from an online module. So there's a mixture out there, and we need to cater to all parts of it. And I will say that, I mentioned in the recorded remarks, TRU's open learning operation. Before the pandemic, half of our students by head count were 100% online, and half were mostly in person. So we were half and half in person and online before the pandemic. I'm sure will be a mixture of both after the pandemic, but we're really waiting to see how that evolves and kind of looking for the choices that people will make.
Thank you. Next question is, how do you see TRU becoming more involved with local government and establishing partnerships and identifying regional needs?
I think there's two things, and one of them is really, of course, the importance of informal connections. So, I came here as a president at TRU, as was mentioned earlier, just at the very end of 2018. So I've had 1 year before the pandemic to start meeting people and exploring the region. And when I can travel and meet people again and all of that, I really look forward to establishing those personal connections. That's a priority for me. So the informal and the personal is really important. That also happens by our faculty researchers, our student researchers in communities, our deans, and the contacts they make. But I think a second dimension is formal partnership agreements. And we have some of those with a number of partners, and I mentioned a couple of them in my earlier remarks. But I think that's a very good way for organizations to think through their interests and their commitments to each other. So I certainly hope that we'll develop a growing number of formal partnership agreements in the future.
Thank you. And what I believe to be our final question, unless we get anything in at the last minute here. You mentioned 40% of all TRU students are international. What is TRU doing to attract and keep international students?
For many years, TRU has had a really strong organization internally. So TRU World is the arm of the university that advertises, recruits, supports international students after they come to Canada as well. And they do an amazing job. So a lot of our recruitment is really built up by word of mouth and by family members, where one sibling has come to BC because of participating in a TRU program, and their siblings or their children come after them. So we actually, we have put a lot of effort into recruitment and into making our name known, but we don't have much difficulty generating demand. Let's just say the demand is very strong and has remained strong throughout the pandemic. And what the students want, by the way, is at least as much about Canada as it is about TRU. People from all over the world want to come here and really appreciate the opportunities they have to work and gain experience, and in many cases to stay here and contribute to the Canadian economy. So it's not hard to sell students on our programs and on what Canada has to offer. The barriers that we're working on right now are all the practical ones associated with the pandemic. So our students face a lot of hurdles to get here from outside Canada's borders. And you'll know from the news about the quarantine requirements and demonstration of COVID tests and study visas and all of that stuff. And those problems are enormous. There are huge backlogs in processing. Many students who are accepted aren't able physically to get here. Back in January, we welcomed about 300 brand new international students onto our campus. And we're really pleased that those 300 made it through all those hoops. But really, it's our conversations with the federal government, it's our conversations with the agencies responsible for visas. That's the single most important thing that we're working on now to try and keep it possible for students to keep coming.
Thank you very much. I'm just double checking to see if we had any last minute questions come in, and we haven't. So then I'll thank everyone for their questions. Thanks again to President Fairbairn for joining us today. I found the presentation really interesting, especially just to see how the university is adapting to the current situation. I'm happy to hear that you had so many international students successfully make it in, so that's great. I'd also like to thank Mike and Bonnie from Lee's Music for providing the AV services for the series. And thank you so much for participating in this speaker series. Just a reminder, our next event is the April 28th AGM. Keep watching your emails for more information, or go to the SILGA website as updated information is being added every day. Enjoy the sunshine and stay safe, everyone.